Regional Mental Health Support that Works. It is presented by Sarah Nesbitt from Access Psychology. In recognition of the deep history and culture of this land, we acknowledge the Tasmanian Aboriginal people, the original and continuing custodians of the land, sea and sky. We acknowledge and pay our respects to all Tasmanian Aboriginal people, all of whom have survived invasion, dispossession, and continue to maintain their identity, culture, and Aboriginal rights. Please take a moment to read the following slide about the information received today. Audience members can use the chat tab to type any questions they have for today's presenter. We'll answer those at the end of the session. Only presenter webcams will be used, and today's presentation is being recorded and will be available on Worksites Tasmania's YouTube channel at the end of the month. It is now my pleasure to introduce your presenter, Sarah Nesbitt from Access Psych. Sarah is a registered psychologist with more than 8 years' experience across workplace rehabilitation, community health, justice and workers' compensation. As National Operations Manager at Access Psych, she provides clinical leadership, risk management and service oversight, translating evidence-based knowledge into practical strategies for workplaces and communities. Please join me in welcoming Sarah to the stage.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Hearing that back, I think I might be needing to ask for a pay rise after this. That's a good bio. Yeah, welcome everyone. Thank you for having me. A little bit nervous today. I'm a psychologist, so I'm used to listening to people. Not always great at the speaking. So bear with me while we get through the next kind of hour. I wanted to tell you a little bit about myself before we begin, just so you know who is talking at you. My name is Sarah Nesbitt, registered psychologist and the National Operations Manager at Access Psych. I started my career back as an intern working for an OC rehab organisation. I got exposed to a lot of workers' comp through that. Kind of learn it inside and out to the extent that I needed to. And then I went on and did some private practice work and work at an Aboriginal medical service where I really kind of developed my clinical skills through those workplaces. Then I think that just kind of rounding out who is Access Psych, basically after a couple of years of kind of working in private practice, a few of my colleagues and myself got together and we had a bit of a chat about how, coming from the workers' comp background, we found that a lot of psychologists in the private practice space really did not have a lot of awareness around workplace issues, workers' compensation issues, and really kind of took the lens of as the advocate for the client, which is great, but at times would overlook the bigger picture in dealing with people in a workplace. So we decided to kind of get together and create an organisation called Access Psych. It was really designed to fill a gap we felt that was there in the workplace wellness space. So that includes things like early intervention in EAP, workers' comp treatment, critical incident support. We do private Medicare. We have some work we do with private organisations in regards to reviewing kind of file reviews for psychological injuries and then things like that. We've grown over the last few years, so this gap that we thought existed must have, and we've tried to fill it the best we have, the best we can do. But we didn't want to kind of fill it with what we've seen out there in the market. We didn't want to go and just kind of employ anyone who didn't have the qualifications that we thought were necessary to work in this space to a standard and level that we needed them to work. So our organisation is registered psychs, mental health social workers, and apart from that, if there is equivalence of that qualification, we'll recognise that as well. We're national companies spanning over 55 clinicians, primarily over Tas and the East Coast. But yeah, that's I guess who I am, and who we are. It has been a massive kind of massive 5-6 years in this space. We've seen a lot of changes. I think that brings me to my next slide of why this matters. So, you know, talking today about regional mental health support is something that's very kind of close to my heart. I'm very passionate about it, and it over the last, you know, probably 10 years, we've seen a lot of changes in the mental health space. So previously we used to have, and I hope you can kind of identify with this, we used to kind of, you know, say, oh, we've got an EAP program if you've got any issues going on at work, and, you know, people may opt in, opt out to that. If anyone was having kind of, you know, acute issues, they'd go and see their GP, they'd get a referral to a mental health care plan and see a psychologist. Over the last 10 years, the space has changed. A lot of kind of people who wouldn't normally have gone to seek help have. And the world in itself has meant that there's a lot of us who are now seeking help where we probably wouldn't have before, which is a good thing. And that has kind of put a bit of pressure on the mental health space. And so what we've seen is a lot of my colleagues in private practice have had to shut their books because they're so full. You can't get in to see a psych. A lot of them have had waiting lists for months and months and months. And in turn, what we've seen that do is it's actually put a lot of pressure on the workplace supporting this. And so where we used to see people access EAP for workplace issues, we started seeing a real shift where they were accessing it for any issues that they might have in life. It could be relationship issues or anxiety in their day-to-day life, parenting issues. And so the space of EAP has started to really kind of change. And what has also happened is there is kind of this, well, legislation changes, which now you know, you're seeing workplaces having pressure to make sure that they've created a mentally healthy workplace, and now, you know, we really view the person as a whole person. I know some old school leaders that I, you know, like the last couple of years, I haven't heard it as much, but I used to always hear, you know, personal life is your personal life and you leave it at the door. And when you come to work, you know, that's when it's my problem. Unfortunately, that's not the case. And a lot of employers are now either, you know, because of legislation made to acknowledge that, but they have kind of caught up with the world, and we are now acknowledging that, you know, you're a whole person, and I think kind of we're able to individually identify with that, because I know myself, if I've got a lot going on at home, you know, I'm ignorant to think that that's not going to impact, you know, my day at work. So mental health in the workplace is very important, and not only these challenges that I've just noted are apparent within all workplaces, but then you've also got on top of that the unique challenges to regional and rural workplaces. So you've got things like distance. Just to kind of give you my experience, you know, I've had clients, especially in Tas, that I've seen who have looking for, you know, a neurodiversity assessment. They've jumped on, you know, 2 planes at times just to get to the clinician that can do that assessment and diagnosis. So the distance is sometimes such a huge element. It also, when you're weighing up whether you should seek support, you're really kind of weighing up a lot of things. One of them is, you know, how am I going to access it? What logistics do I need to consider? And sometimes what will happen is all that might be too much, where someone that would normally in a non kind of regional or rural area may just go and access support. That may actually be a barrier for that. So that is something to kind of consider. The isolation, that can be kind of, I talk to a lot of employees who, not everyone has a family. Not everyone is well connected. Not everyone likes a large social network, even if they wanted to. So isolation really exists out there, and loneliness can really perpetuate mental health issues if you've got them going on. So that's a consideration. Limited services, I find it's always incredible the reception I get when I walk into a workplace. Quite often I'm nervous. I'm expecting this. Oh my God, who's this? Who, here we go again. We've got someone we've got to talk to, or, but the amount of appreciation I get, especially working with people from regional and rural areas, it's quite delightful, but it's also, does give me that sense, wow, like, that the services are that limited here, that their appreciation level is really kind of showing me that. Stigma. So, you would think maybe 2025 we've probably be able to cross this one off the list, but no, it definitely is still out there, especially, I would do a lot of work with, I guess, male dominated industries as well, and in those workplaces you can see that there is still some of that stigma that exists around not just mental health, but speaking about problems, speaking about issues that are going on, not even kind of getting to the help seeking part, just even acknowledging and being able to communicate. So that's definitely a challenge that exists. And I think when you are situated, I guess, isolated, you're not exactly hearing you're not hearing that that Joe Blow at the next corner desk went and saw a psych last week to have a chat about the issues that are going on. And so it's kind of this perpetuating stigma that does get caught a little bit. Good news is we'll touch on it later, but it's not a huge thing to kind of change. Culture definitely plays a huge part in this. The big, I'm too tough to talk about my feelings. Again, didn't know we'd be talking about this in 2025, but it definitely still is out there, and it is a little bit contagious too. If the culture is like that, for one person to go the other way, it can definitely be, feeling like you're going against the tide, and it might be easy just to go with the tide. So if you've got a culture of openness and willingness to communicate about how you're feeling, you'll find that more people are willing to step up and put their hand up when they need help. What I want to kind of note here too, I guess, is that in my experience, especially working with do a lot of kind of that early intervention in the EAP space, but also interestingly, when working with clients who have gone on to workers' comp for a psychological injury or a secondary psychological injury, it's really interesting in that usually what they want to talk about by the time they get to us, it's actually not the issue. So if there was an incident that happened that caused this, that is usually not what they want to talk about. What their biggest gripe is is feeling a lack of support from the organisation. So they're usually talking about how they don't feel supported, how how they could have been supported more. They're feeling like a vengeance kind of almost because they feel like they should have been supported and were let down. And so I think that's a really kind of important thing to talk about when we're saying, why does this matter? Because it matters because employees do feel whether they're feeling supported and whether challenges to get them to feel supported are being overcome or not. I will move on to the next slide. I should just kind of mention too, I've got down there my experience in these areas, just to give you a bit of an idea. I've kind of been traveling around for the last few years, all different areas of Australia. There was one where I drove for 4 hours in the middle of Australia at one point on a dirt road, and then GPS told me to turn left, and I was there, and I thought, this can't be right. But sure enough, there was this little community out in the middle of nowhere, and it is always eye-opening when I guess we all live in a bit of a bubble sometimes, and our reality is what we know, and it's not until you get out there and you actually work with the community, with people, and you really start to broaden your mindset about everything. I have been wrong so many times about what I think's going on, what's happening. I remember once going to see some fly in, fly out workers. And, we discussed before we went there, the employer said to me, the biggest problem is them having to kind of assimilate back into their families once they're back. And they're missing their families when they're away, and that's their biggest problem. I'm like, okay, yep, I can work on that. Missing their families while they're away, yep, we can do that. And when I actually spoke to these workers, that wasn't that. They were actually quite in their happy place in that space. Their problem was when they got home. When they got home, their families had kind of the cogs turning while they've been gone, and they feel like they've kind of come in and shattered that. They don't know their place. They don't kind of really see where they fit in when they get back. And so it was quite interesting what, my view was walking into what reality was. And I very much appreciate those moments where I have been really off the mark, because they have really just reinforced to me that you need to be really open to people's individual experiences, and in terms of workplaces, every single workplace is different, and you all have kind of your own challenges. So please don't ever try and kind of lump one rule on everyone. Okay, a little bit about us. So we have a bit of a model of support that we implement with workplaces. I have to acknowledge kind of here too, one of the great partnerships that we've currently got is with Hydro Tasmania, and to work with a workplace that's willing to take a bit of a risk at wrapping around support in the mental health space. It has been, a real privilege. We've got a long way to go, and we are continuously working together to improve things. But it's something that we've been quite proud of our partnership. The biggest thing that I would note, and that I have noted not only with Hydro Tas but with other workplaces, is on-site visits. So generally these are reserved for critical incident support. So quite often I'll get a call at the 11th hour saying something's just happened, we need you here straight away. I don't like them, if I'm going to be completely transparent with you guys. I don't like them. I think that people have their own internal mechanisms to deal with coping. I think kind of jumping in too fast, too quick can interrupt that. and getting on site to me is extremely valuable. But I see it more valuable in an early intervention space. So basically, you know, over the last few years, we've seen workplaces do things like get physios on site or, you know, EPs on site. Quite often the mental health stuff is overlooked. In my experience, the on-site visits for me personally, I have found the biggest benefit when supporting regional workers. So to give you a bit of an experience of mine, I got sent to a workplace, all males, all tradies. Walked in, I had all the arms crossed, ready to greet me. No one looking like they were looking forward to seeing me. And I thought, oh God, here we go. Is this going to be a waste of my time, waste of their time? Sure enough, everyone was very cagey. You know, I'd set up a little office in the corner. I had it all planned out. I had an office that, you know, one by one, they were going to come in and have a chat to me. Sat there, first hour went by, second hour went by, haven't seen anyone yet. So I'm like, okay, this is not how we're gonna crack this workplace. So ended up going down to the local shop, which was a nice 3-hour round trip away. Brought up a big spread of food, and who doesn't like a free feed? Got back, went into the lunchroom, set it up, told the guys that, you know, lunch was served. In they come, and spent, you know, the next couple of hours having a chat with them in the lunchroom, getting to know me, getting to know them. I think a big mistake that clinicians will sometimes make is that they expect people to tell them about themselves when they don't actually do that in return. I feel it's very important that there is that relationship building is a two-way street. So getting to know these blokes, telling them a bit about my life, it helped disarm them. They weren't being required to tell them anything about themselves. I got to know them. I spent the afternoon, you know, pretending to be extremely interested in a machine that I'd never seen before and have never seen since. But in doing that, I really got to build some great rapport. The next time I was there, a couple of weeks later, I didn't see the crossed arms. I didn't see anyone running for my office either, though. So again, spent some time walking around the workplace. I ditched the office. I thought, okay, I don't need this anymore. I realized that going for a walk with people, or, you know, going for a drive, that's where people were wanting to open up to me. So, you know, that is a very kind of good way. Just in terms of, you know, not telling you too much of this story because there's some confidentiality involved, but, you know, there was one incident where, you know, I had a bloke who called me over to tell me that, you know, he didn't want to talk to me, which was my first sign that maybe he wanted to talk to me. And yeah, said he's never talked to anyone before, and he doesn't see any benefit in it. He thinks it's a whole sham load of. So I said, okay, well, no worries. Like, yeah, that's cool. That's you don't have to talk to me. If you want, you can just tell me what you got up to on the weekend if you want to. And he said, oh yeah, I'll tell you that. So he started telling me what he got up to on the weekend, and I could see as he was working, he was working away. And he was telling me, and then I noticed, you know, the organic conversation was kind of coming to an end, and I could see him doing the same thing over and over again. And I'm like, he doesn't want to stop the conversation. He's already done what he needs to do for work. Why isn't he moving on? And so I kind of kept hanging around talking to him. He ended up opening up and telling me something that he's never told anybody before, and extreme kind of childhood trauma issue that he had been holding for a very long time. When I asked him why he hadn't talked to anyone about this, he said he just didn't see the point. It's not going to change things, but it is something that he has found has impacted him, in the workplace, outside of the workplace, with relationships. And so we had a chat about that. Went back to my office, done some in between kind of sessions. And in the end, probably one of the most positive experiences of my working career. The bloke, completely kind of expressed to me how appreciative he was for the experience and how much it did benefit his life. That particular workplace, that's probably something I'm most proud of. The manager kind of, few sessions down the track, and don't get me wrong, it took probably 5 or 6 goes. Definitely didn't walk out feeling like a winner after the first one, but after the 5th or 6th one, they actually started talking themselves in the lunchroom without me. So they started talking about how they were feeling, any issues going on. One bloke started opening up about, some relationship issues that he was having at the time that no one else knew about. And, the manager kind of reported back to me that the culture that I was talking about, the stigma that I was talking about, it had really, really shifted. So I've seen with my own eyes that can happen. Don't write it off if that is the case in a workplace. One-on-one counselling. So, definitely that workplace is that onsite is a really good way of building rapport. But at the same time, there are sometimes, especially, if there's an emotional topic, sometimes people don't want to get that emotional in the workplace, so they will ask for that one-on-one counselling. I think a lot of mistakes I see in workplaces, I'll ask them if they have an EAP program, and they'll say, yep, and they'll show me, and I'll have a look at it. And, it might be an overseas company with unqualified clinicians, which I get. Everyone's kind of feeling the pinch at the moment, and that's probably a cheaper way to go, and it's ticking the box for you. Then that's what you've got to do. But for me, I think that this, if you're engaging in an EAP program, you really need to just make sure that the people you're engaging with are qualified, they do have experience, and they are the right people to be supporting your employees. The one-on-one counselling we've seen really go from predominantly, we're talking probably 95% pre-COVID face-to-face. Since COVID, that's flipped on its head. At the moment at Access Psych, we do 80% telehealth. And so we've found a real accessibility in providing telehealth. I must say that's video call, not telephone. We don't like telephone. We just find that, there's a lot that can be picked up in terms of assessing risk via video. So video calls are a really good way, especially in people in remote and regional areas, to connect to someone that they might not have been able to. We've found it really, really useful as well with specific issues. So we might have a clinician based in a remote area, but their specialty might be in one area, and their client's looking for something else. And so no clinician is going to be jack of all trades. If they are, red flags. So, we've got things like couples counsellors, child and adolescent counsellors, assessors, neurodivergent cognitive assessors, grief and loss counsellors, that type of thing. So the importance of accessibility really does help reduce the barriers to people accessing the right support. And I emphasize the right support there, because it only takes one go. The amount of people I've spoke to that said, nah, counselling's not for me. I gave it a crack once and never again. And so it's really, really important that they have a good experience, because it can only take that one time to turn them off. Holistic support, whole person approach. So like I said, we've really kind of turned a corner in the way we approach mental health in the workplace. We do look at people as a whole person. Some of our most successful EAP programs have been working with families as well as employees, which is, is something that's new and quite surprising. We also find the holistic support is really important, because sometimes people don't know themselves. I had a workers' comp client once who was coming to me. She was 39, about to turn 40, and she was having some real interpersonal issues at work, really, really bad, that she just couldn't get past, and she didn't know why. She's always been a very hard worker, very good at what she does, never had a problem in the workplace, and all of a sudden, she's just not handling the workplace, not handling people, not handling life. And she had no idea why. We went kind of 3 sessions where we were really working on conflict resolution and emotional regulation. And then halfway through the 4th session, she just happened to mention that her mum passed away of suicide when at age 40. And I was like, whoa. And she just kept talking. It was just hidden in a sentence. And I said, whoa, come back. Tell me about that. And she goes, oh, I don't know. She turned 40 and that's when it happened. I said, oh, okay. And you're about to turn 40. And she's like, yes. And then we started to uncover that there was a lot of this was underlying what was going on for her. And it wasn't that that's what I think when workplaces say, is it a workplace issue or is it a personal issue? I often think about her and think that was definitely a workplace issue. The underlying factor was a personal issue, but she didn't even know. She couldn't even identify it. So if she can't identify it, how are we going to identify it? How's the workplace going to identify it? So treating people, in the whole person approach is very important. Manager support, we found that quite often, we get stuck in there, we work with the employees, we do everything we can, and then, sometimes the managers are left kind of, left in the cold, left in the dark. They don't get a whole lot of support. I liken it a little bit to when I used to work with children and young people. I'd have the parents come in and drop them off and go, here you go, fix them, I'll see you in an hour. And I'd be like, no, they're going to spend 24/7 with you. They're only going to spend an hour with me. We need you. Like, you're the key here. So I feel a little bit like that with workplaces. We really need to make sure that our managers are supported. We've got to make sure that they have specific dedicated support. So again, an EAP program would include a dedicated manager support line that they could speak to someone with that kind of managerial knowledge. Also, the training and feedback that you get from them is extremely important. They will help guide what is needed in the workplace. Psychoeducation, tailoring education context and workplace culture. So this one is a good one. Quite often, if I can get in the tea room and a toolbox talk, have a chat to everyone, that probably not going to land for 90% of people. You're getting blank looks back, but there's a couple of people in the crowd that you're like, okay, they needed to hear this. Things like self-care. A lot of self-care we take for granted. A lot of self-care, we think it's so basic that, it doesn't even need to be said, where a lot of times, talking about self-care and educating people around what that is and how to look after themselves is extremely important. Anxiety, it's such a kind of a word you hear around. A lot of people don't actually really know what it means and how it manifests in you. yeah, the first thing I say to anyone, if a client tells me that they have anxiety, I just say, what does that mean? Like, what does that mean for you? Like, tell me. We've all read it, we've all seen it pop up on social media, but what does that actually mean for you? And so when you start to talk to people like that it's really surprising, how much people are impacted by conditions like anxiety that they don't even know. They just think, oh, I've got an upset stomach, or I'm just, my breathing gets like this sometimes. So psychoeducation is an important piece, and it does help kind of show that you are interested and are supporting. Couple of the workplaces I've been to have kind of said, the fact that our workplace are willing to invest into this tells me more than, what the investment actually was. So that's, that's something to keep in mind. So yeah, I guess I'm kind of showing you our model of support, just to kind of say, giving someone a hotline number and telling them that that's their support isn't always the best approach. And you probably relying on someone to ring. A lot of times when I've spoken to people in workplaces, I'll say, oh, have you rang EAP for this? And they're like, no, nothing's happened. Like, why would I ring EAP? Nothing's happened. So, it's really about either reframing what EAP means, and really encouraging people to utilize it, or thinking outside the box and trying to get, some other support in place. So how do we embed it? So that's a good question, isn't it? When I was thinking about presenting on this topic, it kind of threw my mind back to when I was presenting at I know you guys are AFL guys, so please forgive me for using an NRL story here, but I was at the Penrith Panthers, and it was coming off the back of when they'd won a few kind of seasons in a row. And I remember them saying one of the reasons why we're so successful is that we've got this inbuilt culture where we're able to be vulnerable with each other. And because we're being able to be vulnerable with each other, we really band together as a team, and we really work together well as a team. Drilling down on that, I'm like, okay, that sounds really nice. How? Like, we all, how do you do that? And I remember them saying they have this program where they get the players together, and a player will stand up and tell them about how they're going, if they're struggling with anything, any challenges. And they said they did that for about 12 months, and it absolutely flopped. It failed. No one wanted to stand up. If they did, it was pretty surface level. Nothing was really kind of, nothing significant was coming up. So what they did, they made one change, and it changed everything. And the one change they made was they got the coach to stand up and speak first, and then they got the captain to. And so at every session, the coach went first and then the captain. And they said that one change just green lighted everyone else to feel comfortable in getting up and being vulnerable as well. So when I'm talking about embedding something into your workplace, it really has to come, from the leaders. The people need to see that leaders are doing this. And another example is at a workplace, we were talking about EAP, and, everyone was rolling their eyes. And then a manager spoke up and said about his experience when he accessed it and how he found it, and, what the good things were, what the challenges were. And then you could see people like, oh, okay. And so really kind of helping normalize the experience of reaching out and asking for help. It can come from those leaders in the group, even if it's not a manager status. If there's someone in the group that is kind of seen as a group leader, encouraging them to speak about their experience if they've had one, reaching out, that really does help. It is surprising when we start talking about mental health. I mean, it's like it gets a bit of the word mental health even kind of gives people, you know, a little bit of a step back at times. But when you actually start talking about it, you know, like, I think we can all relate, you know, like I don't think there's anyone else. I remember kind of giggling once in COVID. I remember I had a session with someone and they said, "Oh, Sarah, I am really, really struggling." And I remember in my head, I responded, I went, "Me too." You know, like I think that we are all straight. Like, life is hard, and I don't, you know, like, finances at the moment is hard, and balancing work and family is hard, and, you know, managing, you know, going through different stages of life is hard, and so we are all doing it hard. Some, yep, harder than others, but I think if we actually kind of opened up and started talking about it, we'd realize that we're all in pretty similar boats. There's obviously, you know, the ends of the spectrums, but we're all kind of shuffling around, you know, doing the best we can, and that can really kind of break any stigmas. The trauma-informed approach, you know, it's really important that workplaces don't just have intention. If you know, good intention is great, but it's got to be more than that. You can't just mean well and that'll mean that everything will be fine. You've actually got to say what you do. If you're saying we're going to do this, you need to do it. If you're looking to get support for someone, you need to make sure that you do that. We need to make sure that the way we're using our words and our language is appropriate, and it's not going to kind of do more harm than good. So really kind of making sure we're acting in a trauma-informed way, relationship-centered way, that is extremely important. The nuances of workplace culture and how each site is unique. You know, this is very evident to me. As much as I feel like I've got a little bit of a toolkit when I go into workplaces, at the end of the day, I'm quite open-minded. I'm going in there pretty much with a blank slate, couple of kind of trusty old tools in the back pocket, but pretty much I'm going in there with a blank slate going, okay, what's going on here? Because there's so many different nuances. My experience working in remote areas, you know, Joe Blow's brother's cousin's sister is probably, you know, the person they're having an interpersonal issue with. So it's not just about, you know, how you're going to work together. You've also got to kind of have family dinner at the end of the week as well. So there's different considerations that you've got to have when working in different workplaces. There was an instance where we had to be on site for a termination of employment for someone, and you know, I remember a colleague of mine saying, "Well, why do you have to be on site for a term?" And that's pretty standard kind of, you'd call in HR, not a psychologist, and kind of had to explain that, well, this isn't, they're all going to see each other at IGA later today, you know, like there are other factors that you need to kind of consider in this. Some practical insights and lessons learned. I hope you can learn from a lot of the lessons where I've kind of gone wrong, because I definitely have. I think consistency is a massive thing. So, you know, that workplace I went into, there was a similar one where, you know, I couldn't get there, so I sent a colleague of mine, and then, you know, I went back the next time and they were a bit kind of colder to me, and I'm like, what's, you know, and I think you've got to realize that any support isn't good support. People really, if they're going to open up to someone and they're going to really be vulnerable to someone and let them in, they need to know that support is going to be consistent, and that they're not going to just divulge their whole life and then never see that person again, although sometimes that is preferable. Consistency is a massive kind of key, and I know I've learned a lesson from that. Presence. I know I was talking to someone the other day, one of our employers. They said, "Oh, no, we didn't have anyone go and talk to the clinician on site the other day." And I said, "Oh, okay." And I had a look in. When the clinician left, they had 4 people book in that week from that workplace. So the employee didn't visibly see that had happened, but that presence was so important for that help seeking afterwards. Flexibility, you really need to make sure that you find someone who is right for the team, and that they can be flexible with it. I've been, we do a lot of work with first responders, and at times, the call they want is going to be late at night. So you've got to kind of make sure that you're flexible in your approach. Common pitfalls, I think the wrong clinician is a huge common pitfall, and it's a hard one because you don't know until it really happens. You can weed it out the best you can, but sometimes you'll get it wrong. So if you don't have the right fit, if people have a terrible experience, they're going to be so much more guarded to it next time. Being too formal, I think with this type of support, I've seen in the regional and rural areas, it's more important than anywhere that you make sure that you have a clinician that's approachable. If you go in too formal, you've already kind of put a barrier up. So that's probably something. Again, that room that I had set up for a clinic room, that was great at home when people were booking in to see me, but on site and with a bunch of tradies, they don't want to sit in 4 walls. Expecting quick engagement. These have been long-term relationships we've invested in to get really good results. So don't expect a quick engagement. And lack of leadership buy-in. If your leaders aren't on the same page of you, you're going to have a real trouble getting this culture and stigma shifted. Start small. That's important. You don't want to kind of bite off more than you can chew, and you also need to kind of be able to pivot if you need to. So starting small helps understand where you need to go. Collaborate with your leadership and employees. Quite often I'll have an employer ring me and they'll say, we need something, but I don't know what. And I'll go, give me 3 phone numbers from the workplace and I'll ask them. So, it's amazing what asking the question can do. And then, integration. So obviously, making sure wellbeing is in your safety frameworks. I think the workers' comp experience I've had where people say the lack of support, I think the more that you can show people in the early stages that support is there, then it'll lessen that impact that we're seeing post-incident, that they feel a lack of support. So just kind of wrapping it up, embedding it into the workplace, probably easier than it sounds, but hopefully a few of those practical tips can help you understand where to start. Must be flexible, and it has to be kind of, the appropriate context, relationship-based. Most people I work with in regional and rural areas really value relationships. And so there needs to be that kind of really relationship-based approach. Small, consistent steps leads to that long-term sustainable change. Whew. I don't know if anyone's still awake or not after all that talking from me, but this is a bit of an opportunity if you want to chuck any questions up in the chat, and happy to answer it the best I can.
Thank you. I doubt anybody is asleep. I reckon everyone's really engaged and I'm thinking about the great points you've covered. Like, who would have thought building rapport, focusing on relationships and hanging in there would have such a difference? Yeah. I think sometimes too we overthink it. We want a quick training, a quick fix, but sometimes it is just that kind of getting in there and doing the hard slog that really pays off at the end of the day. And a bit of courage and bravery and perseverance. I was really struck by the anecdote you gave about working with a person that said, "Oh, why would I tell anyone? It won't change anything." But then for them to have a realization that will change things is life-changing and really empowering, I thought. And just when you take a step back from that too, like I remember speaking to him about how that's now changed how he speaks to his children around,
asking for help, and his family and his, you know, friends and colleagues. So the wider impact that can have is massive.
Yeah, the ripple effect we've heard a lot about during the sessions this month. People talk about a ripple effect from various things which will occur in life and at workplaces, and
Yeah.
often we ignore that, or we just look at an individual in a social context, which again, I think your talk talked about how limiting that can be as opposed to a whole person, whole life approach.
Yeah, definitely.
And just the normality of human experiences as well is something I really picked up from your presentation. It's okay to feel the range of human emotions. They're common to our experience. They're part of what makes us unique and human.
Yeah.
Yeah, staggering to see the amount of shame and misconception to the
Yeah.
around as you.
I always like to see the response from the client when I usually say a lot, if you're feeling like crap, it's because things are crap. Like that's very appropriate, you know, and almost in the sense that I'd be worried about you if you weren't feeling like this, and that, you know, that is okay. A lot of times what people's the problem people is feeling, it's not that's the issue. It's the secondary emotion to it. So, for example, you know, fear is a big one that can really turn people up, but quite often it's like they've got this anxiety about the fear, or, you know, if it is depression, they've got shame about the depression. And so it really is about kind of sitting with that secondary emotion too and treating that.
Yeah, we've had a comment come in, which I'll just share with the room. It's more of an acknowledgement and a thank you at this point, and I would chime in with this fantastic learnings and stories. Thank you very much for sharing. It was really rewarding hearing about the perseverance you showed and the benefits that says, and being human. I think you've really broken down what can be something people are really cautious about touching, as you mentioned, into some human activities like eating, being present with people when they're doing something that calms them, so they've got that space to finally get to an issue that they've been pushing down for a long time.
Yeah. Well, I know I said at the beginning, but yeah, thank you again for having me. It's something that, yeah, I feel very kind of passionate about, as I made sure I didn't go over time, but I definitely could talk about this all day long. So if anyone, yeah, does have anything that they want to reach out and discuss post, feel free to get in touch.
That's right. We'll also be publishing this video at the end of the month so people can refresh their knowledge and share it with their colleagues and friends and family members, because it's certainly valuable information. Well, thank you for coming on today, Sarah. A reminder to the audience, thank you again for attending. We have got some face-to-face sessions starting for the next fortnight in Tasmania, so head to worksafe.tas.gov.au/month and see what the rest of the program looks like. After we conclude today's presentation, a short satisfaction survey will come back on to your screens. If you don't mind completing that, that'll help us inform what we do next year. But thanks again to Sarah, and I hope everyone else enjoys the rest of WorkSafe Month.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.